From the very start, the potential people saw in the dynamic of Pomni and Ragatha was one of the most anticipated, speculated upon aspects of the show. And for very good reason, because the angst, stemming from the moral dilemma the episode presents Pomni with, was absolutely juicy as hell. Being scared and confused, she clearly wasn't in the best frame of mind to be making any life or death choices, but unfortunately for her, Kofmo had other plans. With Ragatha being savaged before Pomni's very eyes, she was forced to make a snap decision: run away and save herself, or risk her life trying to help the nice girl she just met. And as we all know, she ended up choosing to run. And I mean, quite frankly, it was a completely understandable, rational decision. Being real here, what could she have possibly done to help? That said, it doesn't make the principle of abandoning Ragatha, when she'd been so nice to her, all that much better. And clearly, making such a decision must have weighed heavily upon Pomni's mind, stammering and stuttering when trying to explain herself. And if abandoning Ragatha wasn't bad enough, after poorly communicating her thought process, she even got distracted looking for an exit instead of finding Kane to help fix her. And again, it's justifiable to make that choice, but it was a pretty selfish one in principle. And then on Ragatha's side of things, you had to wonder, was she really alright with what Pomni did, or simply swallowing her feelings? It's one thing to accept being abandoned, but not only is she totally understanding, she apologizes to Pomni for her first day being so terrible, instead of even complaining about her pain, which she clearly was in, as we see later.
I am in so much pain!
How can someone be so selfless? But then you had the ending where the two were sheepish as hell and couldn't even look each other in the eye. What a great setup this seemed to be, for what presumably later would bring about a big emotional payoff. Maybe Ragatha is, for whatever reason, pushed to confess how she really felt that day, and then Pomni, who perhaps found her smothering to be off-putting initially, since she never lets on she appreciated it, would realise what a blessing Ragatha had actually been. And from there, the girls could finally forge a genuine bond. However, while a strong friendship did in fact eventually manage to form, the show kind of goes about it in the most roundabout way possible. To the point you have to wonder, were they ever even friends to begin with? So Pomni is clearly traumatized by the experience next episode, and dreams about Ragatha, as well as Jax and Kane, callously mocking the fact she abstracted as she descends into the basement. If she's having a dream like this, then clearly part of her believed that Ragatha's kindness was just an act, and the fact that she had believed this was totally going to lead into her learning Ragatha is actually a good friend, allowing them to become actual friends over the course of the show, right? Well, kinda, but not really. While she does of course come around to Ragatha at the end, endeared by the funeral held for Kofmo, her epiphany was realizing that no one in the circus was out to get her. This wasn't a personal issue with Ragatha, but an issue shared with the whole rest of the cast. As such, it didn't really give us a status update on their friendship. Did the show really not intend to elaborate on what happened between them before? And if not, why have Ragatha suspiciously mentioned there's no hard feelings about what happened at the start of the episode?
And don't worry about the whole abandoning me for the exit thing. It's perfectly understandable what you were going through at the time, and there's no hard feelings. You're all good.
Unfortunately, the next two episodes didn't really answer that question, because they wouldn't interact much directly at all. But while Ragatha is relegated to the C-plot in Mildenhall Manor, Spudsies at least does give us a little bit of insight into her psyche, which could very much imply the tensions from the first episode were left unresolved. I mean, surely the show had to be planning to do something with them, right? So anyway, after getting intoxicated from stupid sauce, Ragatha accidentally lets it slip that she finds Gangle annoying with her happy mask, and with this, we finally have confirmation that this girl is extremely good at concealing her true feelings. And if that's the case, maybe she really was hurt by Pomni, and the plot thickens even further. While being comforted by her, Pomni recommends Gangle talk to Ragatha about her issues, to which Gangle responds that while she may love Ragatha, you wonder how genuine she actually is after a while. You'd think surely this was setting up Pomni questioning whether or not Ragatha was hiding anything from her, especially pertaining to what went down with Kofmo, right? Maybe Pomni deep down knew something was up, and that's why thus far she hadn't seemed to further the relationship. Because it was frankly rather odd how distant Pomni had seemed with her at this point. Well, in the 5th episode, a confrontation finally happens. However, rather than being between those two like you'd expect, it's with Ragatha and Jax. Not to say Pomni isn't a big part of that confrontation of course, since she's actually the very catalyst that sets the events in motion. And curiously, this idea of Ragatha having a facade that was running thin on Pomni is continued, and yet ultimately, nothing suggests it has much to do with any previous plot point. despite how much sense it would have made had it been. The episode starts with Ragatha comforting Pomni after an unpleasant adventure, though she quickly leaves with Kinga before she even comes to. Clearly this was meant to be read as very slightly inconsiderate, leading Jax to comment on how the positive Ragatha charm seems to be wearing off. And because Pomni isn't really paying attention here, it's hard to tell whether or not Jax was speaking to any sort of truth. Now, while Jax is an unreliable source, this could have very well been the narrative talking through him. Ragatha's attempt to comfort her and President Pomni does seem to fall flat. If this conflict is indeed intended, as multiple references to it seem to suggest, is a bit of an issue, because Pomni never seemed particularly susceptible to her charms. In fact, at this point, it was extremely unclear whether they had formed any sort of unique bond at all. And then, the episode would quickly shift focus from being about how Pomni feels about Ragatha to how Ragatha feels about Jax. When Pomni asks if Jax has ever had friends, Ragatha interjects by saying not anymore. What's important to note here is that she slips up on accident clearly, even if it was spurred by her temper brewing, but it does make it clear she's hiding a lot of resentment, and this is something that Jax can actually feel but takes in the wrong way. He vents to Pomni about how annoying it is that she's always pretending everything's fine, and he even feels like it's a way of taking advantage of you. Now obviously Ragatha isn't being manipulative, and Jax is biased because he hates people getting too close to him. However, is it possible Pomni actually agrees she's annoying to some extent? Honestly, as I see it, it could have leaned either way, because even though she doesn't exactly co-sign what he said outright, and she had defended her by saying she's nice to everybody, she doesn't defend her like a friend would. And again, whether or not Pomni even sees her as a friend is still up in the air. But on the contrary, Ragatha is making clear efforts to be a good friend to Pomni. Is the show making a point with this, or is it just a really one-sided friendship? And then we have the bar scene, and suddenly Ragatha's overly reserved nature starts making a lot more sense. She talks about her mother yelling, berating and guilt-tripping her, leading her to brush what she just said off by calling herself a typical farm girl. It was so clear how desperate she was to vent her mummy issues, to finally talk about herself. Though what's sad is that she only felt inclined to do so at all because she'd wanted to stop the conflict brewing, and that she only stopped because she felt like she was being a burden on everyone else. The mummy issues themselves make it clear why. Being yelled at, she would have felt like her voice was too small to be heard, causing her to not bother ever speaking up. Being berated, she'd obviously feel insignificant and insecure, maybe to the extent she hates herself, but definitely enough to undervalue herself. And if she ever did feel brave enough to try and voice her feelings, the guilt tripping would make her blame herself for them rather than her mother. But more than explaining how she acts in this specific scenario, it accounts for all of her actions thus far. While Jax had detected her acting as if nothing is wrong and forcing positivity as some form of manipulation, what actually seems to be is Ragatha fearing being a burden and absolutely dreading conflict. As for why she's being trying so hard with Pomni though, it's pretty clear she's just trying to make friends, but nothing is coming of it because she doesn't communicate her feelings properly, and her forcing herself to be happy all the time makes it hard to make a genuine connection. But if Ragatha is pushing her away with her self-doubt, and if that is the intended read, shouldn't it be made clear it's affecting Pomni's feelings towards her at all? And if they aren't formally friends yet, it's getting rather late in the episode count to write a friendship that feels particularly deep or meaningful between them. A few moments later at the bar, Jax starts acting weird. He actually apologizes to Pomni for something, specifically the President Pomni adventure, which is obviously crazy because Jax never apologizes for anything. However, it's clear his intentions here aren't wholly virtuous. While he has indeed started to care for Pomni at this point, at the same time it's clear his main goal is to make a show in front of Ragatha. And as I see it, there's possibly two things that seem to be going on here at the same time. The first is that he's seen Ragatha's attempts at advancing a friendship with Pomni, which seem to have been mostly unsuccessful, and that he intended to make her jealous. After all, he had been actively trying to sabotage her efforts over the course of the episode, first insisting her charms are wearing off, then telling her she's manipulative. The second, perhaps most explicit reason, is that Jax may be onto Ragatha not wanting him to influence Pomni, and is simply rubbing the fact she can't do anything about it in her face. After giving Jax an absolutely insane death glance, Ragatha quickly tries to change the subject, perhaps in the most awkwardly unsuccessful way possible, reminiscing about the time Kothmo smashed her against the wall and jumbled her up. Naturally, Pomni did not remember this fondly. I think, just as accidentally invoking the memory of Ribbit and Kothmo to Jax was, this was another Freudian slip from Ragatha. This is something that had clearly been on her mind, and when trying to recall fond memories with Pomni, it's all she can retrieve. Unfortunately though, though, this doesn't lead to the situation being unpacked, and again, it's largely ignored. And, well, that's ultimately fine. I'm not married to the idea of Ragatha or Pomni still being hung up on what happened that day. My problem is that, without that very low-hanging fruit of an explanation, there seems to be no real point to these ideas it keeps bringing up. I mean, it clearly wants to make a point of Ragatha being repressed, and for some reason, it keeps having the people around Pomni being apprehensive about Ragatha's authenticity. If these facts are exclusive of their relationship, said relationship simply does not exist. Because on one side you have Ragatha wondering whether or not Pomni actually likes her, and on the other you have Pomni, who up till this point has made no real indication of how she feels about Ragatha one way or the other. This would be fine if the lack of friendship served a purpose in itself, but it simply doesn't seem to. So anyway, then Jax brings up what Ragatha said to Gangle at Spudsy's, causing Ragatha to be absolutely flabbergasted over what she did, despite apparently already having apologized. Jax, however, simply suggests she should just let herself be mean, which leads us to the next relevant scene. After hitting a fly out by the hand of evil Pomni, Ragatha apologizes to the real Pomni on the bench for not being a better sport, and for the first time, she almost acts like a friend to Ragatha here, telling her that although she doesn't necessarily want to agree with Jax, it's okay for her to feel negative emotions. When Ragatha says she doesn't want to be a jerk, Pomni insists that everybody needs to be a jerk sometimes. So, to be clear, this is like amazing advice to tell Ragatha. Unknowingly, she's teaching her to unlearn the hang-ups instilled in her by her mother. She's telling her that her negative emotions are valid, and that you don't have to act nice all the time for the sake of keeping others happy. Amazing, we love to see it. So, what does Pomni do next? Completely invalidates Ragatha when she has a go at Jax. Huh? Okay, so in Pomni's defense, she has every right to be offended over Ragatha making decisions for her, even if she has her best interests at heart. And to her credit, she is mad at both of them. However, what's completely uncalled for is telling Ragatha to calm down after literally just insisting she's allowed to be a jerk. And sure, she's being really hard on Jax, yelling at him that he thinks everyone loves him, when in reality he fucks everything up for everyone, but like, isn't she kinda right? Jax is a total asshole. Pomni knows this, and to act like Ragatha is being out of line just for giving him a reality check is a bit absurd. Not only has she seen how he treats Gangle, she herself had been subjected to Jax's cruel pranks earlier this episode. Hell, she even called him out earlier for what he did to her in episode 2 just a moment ago. And what's crazy is that Ragatha had more right to be concerned about Jax hurting her than Pomni could ever comprehend, which takes us into episode 6. Boy oh boy, I sure can't wait for an answer why and resolution to Pomni treating Ragatha so weirdly all series long in the next episode that justifies any big friendship moments that may or may not happen in episode 9, on screen. When the gang are discussing adventures with Kane, Pomni is already low-key negging Ragatha about her baseball idea. Okay, it's not that bad, but the episode is clearly still making a point about the fact they're not exactly seeing eye to eye yet. Driving home this fact is that when Pomni asks Ragatha to be on her team, she awkwardly declines, not wanting Kinga to be subjected to Jax. Pomni understands this and offers to be with Kinga instead as a favour. However, Ragatha points out that I'd only leave her with Jax, so Pomni ends up going with Jax herself, and when Ragatha tries to stop her, Pomni assures her she can handle him. Now, it's not exactly clean cut, seeing as her partnership offer kinda gets fumbled, but you know what? This is the first time that Pomni actually acts like she wants to be Ragatha's friend, with no caveat. Holy shit, the Ragapom is real. Except for the fact that Ragatha offers to be there whenever Pomni needs it, and Pomni acts like Ragatha is being a total weirdo. What the fuck is your deal? So I actually really enjoy these two, and I like this moment, so I don't want to rag on it too much. However, establishing this friendship now, like I said last episode, is a bit too little too late, at least in regards to that big emotional moment in episode 9 that haunts the narrative of this very video. We'll get to that later. There's also the elephant in the room, or rather the rabbit in the room of, does Ragatha really want a friendship with Pomni when Pomni is playing in her face? Now, she is absolutely free to choose who she becomes friends with, and while she refers to everyone collectively as her friends to Jax this very episode, at least on screen she's barely interacted with Zubul, and only had an extremely brief stint with Gangle, so as far as we know she's using the term very loosely. So unless the show is forgetting to tell us something about what stage they're actually at here, there's no real obligation there. Someone being nice to you isn't a free ticket to friendship after all. That said, it is bloody weird for Pomni to want to become besties with an asshole like Jax. Not only was he initially not even any nicer to her than the others, he treats Ragatha, someone who looks after Pomni and who Pomni appears to care about now like shit. And again, she's completely allowed to make her own choices and have her own feelings about who she's friends with. But it's extremely hard to understand how either of them would fathom the friendship could work had Jax not blown it at the end of the episode. Later on in the episode, Ragatha makes her beef with Jax known explicitly. She tells him she won't let him corrupt Pomni, subsequently gets shot by him, and later confesses to Kinga in the loser corner that she feels like she's failed not only Pomni but Jax as well. She apparently believes that trying too hard to get into their good books made them wind up hating her. For Jax, who previously did this to Ribbit, we know this to be the case. However, that's everything to do with him, and not the people he pushed away. And when Kinga shares that Pomni doesn't hate her, she says that Jax does, and with Pomni, it feels like she's seen through her tricks and now they're drifting apart. And again, it's the same as when Jax mentioned it. When was she ever falling for her so-called tricks in the first place? Exactly how are you drifting apart when you were never particularly close to begin with? This is technically a really good emotional scene, but it barely lands for me because there's so many blanks I'm forced to fill in myself. At the very least, Kinga does manage to bring it back around by reminding Ragatha that relationships are two-sided and that it makes no sense to do all the heavy lifting. Furthermore, she needs to let Pomni do things her own way and look out for herself as well. This is great advice and actually has been shown. However, it does really draw attention to how one-sided this friendship really is. And when Kinga talks about being there for Pomni when she needs it, I'm wondering why exactly Ragatha is obligated to give her support at all. I can feel the show wants me to see something there, and I greatly enjoy the idea of this apparent friendship existing, but there's just truly nothing here at this point for me to take it seriously. Finally, Ragatha and Pomni bump into each other at the end of the episode, clearly having a lot to tell one another, only to promise each other to talk after the awards show, as in, off screen. Oh my god. So obviously, you're sort of meant to imagine what went down here, and to be fair, it's not all that hard to. Like, in my head, Ragatha said sorry, Pomni told her there's no need to be sorry and apologized herself, then they probably hugged and cried together. Unfortunately, however, implying a relationship isn't actually the same as writing a relationship. And when 90% of the relationship is implication, does it really exist? In my opinion, not really. I don't think an important relationship between two characters should mostly be in my head. And the craziest thing is that even having now formally established there is in fact a friendship there, nothing much is done with it. Thank God Pomni and Ragatha actually get to hang out on the beach a bit in episode 7, and they even got to exchange their thoughts on the Abel situation briefly. But is that not kind of an underwhelming follow-up after the episode prior told us they had a big chat at the end? There's not much to say here other than that it's still not much of a friendship, and in episode 8 we get an even smaller crumb. Pomni references what Ragatha had told her in the first episode, and I guess that's meant to sort of show that she was taking in what Ragatha was saying from the beginning. Having Pomni reveal to Ragatha that she had actually appreciated her guidance all along might have made the friendship feel more grounded and believable had it come a lot sooner. However, the most egregious example of telling and not showing would come in the last act, which gave us the perfect payoff to setup that never existed. After Ragatha talks about her guilt surrounding Jax and how their friendship ended after he made her promise not to tell anyone about Ribbit, Pomni offers her comfort. She tells her that she's the first real friend she ever made and her closest one. And then they hug and cry, and Ragatha tells Pomni that she's the best thing that ever happened to her. And well, it's a beautiful scene, but it's simply not earned. When Pomni and Ragatha part ways, lovingly looking into each other's eyes for what feels like 5 minutes, there's a real disconnect between what I'm seeing and what I should be feeling. Technically, this is everything I ever wanted them to be, but it feels like going through the motions. In fact, the length of it kind of feels like they're overcompensating, making up for extremely minimal setup with extremely gratuitous payoff, which feels so cynical to say about such a sweet scene. But that's simply how it left me feeling. When Pomni calls Ragatha her best friend, I'm thinking about how she clicked far more with Jax, and never really opened up to Ragatha. When Ragatha calls Pomni the best thing that ever happened to her, I'm thinking about how much more work Ragatha put into the friendship, and how little Pomni did to let her know she was doing anything right. And it's just so frustrating because all the ingredients were there for a really interesting, powerful friendship. While it was touched upon a few times, not having the characters resolve the misgivings brought about by that messy first encounter felt like missing connective tissue. Ragatha's entire emotional arc feels rather incomplete without a moment where she lets Pomni know she felt hurt being pushed away. Pomni needed to clarify whether or not this was truly the case, but regardless of what the truth is, to let Ragatha know she's appreciated. On screen, fun. So yeah, I love these characters, love the potential of their friendship, but the execution of the payoff especially left a lot to be desired. Maybe I should have just said that instead of making a 20-minute video. Thanks for watching.